Alison, thank you for agreeing to pop onto the podcast. Really, really grateful. For the benefit of the audience, do you want to introduce yourself and a little bit about who you are and kind of what your role is in the broader landscape of Dubai as well? Because you're someone that I've known for quite a while in the educational sphere. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Dr. Alison Burrows. I am actually a native New Yorker. I've been in Dubai almost 17 years, only in the sector of education for my entire time here in Dubai. I'm a senior lecturer in education at Middlesex University, and I'm also a digital well-being consultant. So not only do I work with families around digital well-being, but I work with schools around what meaningful learning with technology really is. When is it appropriate to use technology in a school and when is it not? And what does the evidence say around when technology actually supports learning more than what we would consider a traditional method of learning?
So what let's get straight into it. What from your perspective right now is the biggest risk for schools, for families, for kids? What's kind of keeping you up at night?
Oh, there's so many things keeping me up at night right now. But I would say that using screens as the default for everything in childhood is a massive risk. So kids are using screens as a default for learning. Kids are using screen as a default for being entertained. Kids are using screens as a default for self-regulation to calm themselves down if they're having a difficult moment. So what they're doing is they're transferring everything to a screen-based life and not learning how to do things in the real world and through human interaction, which is what we're programmed to do.
So last time we met, it was about a year ago, I think, if I'm remembering it properly. You mentioned a book called The Anxious Generation, which is a great text, and thank you for that, because it's led to a splintering of lots of different avenues of my own educational research in this area. Right. Quite informative, actually, and very formative in terms of my views and how I've applied it to the way I've seen things going in the city or just in education in general, but also the way I see it going in the future, where we need to go as a school, where we need to go as a city, broadly in education, what we should and shouldn't be doing.
Right.
Are there any other kind of texts that are really powerful at the moment that parents would be keen to have a look at and might be useful to because I've recommended that book to about, I'd say probably 200, 300 parents since we spoke. Right. So is there anything else out there at the moment that would be useful for parents to
So Dr. Jonathan Haidt, professor at NYU, New York City, wrote that book. It came out, I believe, in 2023. However, he wasn't the first to start talking about how technology is having a negative impact on children's well-being, not to mention adults. So his work really stemmed from the work of Sherry Turkle and Jean Twenge, who are also researchers. Sherry Turkle works out of, I believe it's MIT, and Jean Twenge has been studying generations for generations. So if you look up Jean Twenge or Sherry Turkle, they both have numerous books about this topic. There is a pediatrician out of Boston Children's Hospital. He's called the Mediatrician, and he's researched extensively the effects of screen time on the developing brain. He has a brilliant book. He is not entirely a naysayer. He has a more balanced approach for how families can, and parents in particular, can manage screen time. And more recently, my favorite author on the topic, a man after my own heart, is a neuroscientist. His name is Dr. Jared Cooney-Horvath. He just wrote a book called The Digital Delusion.
Nice.
Which talks about how technology is actually harming rather than helping learning. And he actually just testified in front of Congress in the United States, alongside of Dr. Jean Twenge, about how technology really needs to be removed from school, or at least greatly reduced. And what I like about Dr. Horvath, who I actually was fortunate enough to have a conversation with recently, is that his work is an extension of my doctoral dissertation. So back in 2016, I started noticing, in the context of Dubai, how much technology was being incorporated into classrooms and how quickly it was being incorporated into classrooms and how much teachers were struggling with this. Because at that point in my career, I was a teacher trainer. I would go from school to school and provide professional development workshops to teachers, which I still do. And I sat there scratching my head, why are we putting so much technology into schools so quickly? Are we sure this is helping students? Where's the research? So I applied to do a doctorate in this very topic, really looking at teachers' technology self-efficacy. How confident are they teaching with technology? Because if they're not confident teaching with technology, they're not going to be effective in teaching with technology. And I interviewed close to 40 teachers, and then I had close to 300 teachers in my survey. I gave a survey. And back then, in 2017, 2018, when I started collecting data, teachers were confident only in using the apps that they use in their everyday life, like Microsoft Word and YouTube, right? They didn't feel that they had any technical skills beyond that to pass on to students. And it's very interesting now because if you look at what's happening today in classrooms, most applications that are used in classrooms, you don't need any technical skills to use them.
It's the myth of the digital native, isn't it?
That's right.
Where kids are supposed to have these great digital skill sets, but actually the reality is they're picking up a phone and scrolling. It's not the same. Because their lives are revolved around technology doesn't mean they master it. It's like when we pop on the television, it doesn't mean we know how it works or what the back end of it is.
Exactly.
I'm intrigued by where you think this needs to go now, because obviously you've had quite a run at this for 10 years or so in terms of research, probably more.
Right.
But what's next? What's good practice? Because you mentioned a couple of bits where people are probably kind of anti-tech or more moderate. Right. Where do you see best practice, maybe in a Dubai context as well? Mm-hmm. Where do schools need to go?
I think schools need to pause, reflect, and stop using so much tech, in particular primary schools. There is no reason that a 6-year-old child needs to bring an iPad to school. It blows my mind.
Strongly agree.
It completely blows my mind. Agree. And parents don't want to buy their 6-year-old their own personal iPad and open up the world of the internet to them. Yep. 97% of content on the internet was not designed for children, but we're throwing iPads in our kids' lap because the school says so? That blows my mind.
We're also creating habits. We're creating defaults for kids where they go to certain places for information. And even in the class setting, you may find now in some schools that they go into technology as opposed to the teacher or their friends, their peers, to learn from the world around them, which again is not a healthy place for a 6-year-old in particular to be. Right. No, I strongly agree with that. What about in the upper school? Because my background, as you know, is secondary, and I have a vice principal role. Now I'm across the whole school, but I have more of a kind of a history with secondary students. And again, we spoke about this before. I've been very much involved in educational technology, more trying to focus on the redefinition of what's possible. I appreciate there is 100% a balance to be made, and there has been learning over my career in terms of the efficacy of technology, the impact of technology, not in the learning, even if there is a positive impact on learning, but the outside, the other influence or the other impact on well-being and habits and outside life. Where do you see the city, or where should the city be moving from your perspective and your research in the secondary setting, and particularly in the lower secondary?
Right. So what I would say is, first of all, review the learning science and review the neuroscience. How does the brain learn best? Can technology enable that? In most cases, the way middle school and high school, secondary school students use technology is for learning to be efficient, right? Let me find that information, copy, paste, submit it to the teacher. That's not learning. Learning is not efficient. The way the brain learns is a very slow, deliberate, often frustrating process. So what we see with educational technology is that there's this success fallacy. We think we've learned something Because when we use a technology to get answers, the answers come easy. We understand the answers. So we think we've absorbed the information where in fact we have not. Learning, there's no way we can speed up how the brain lays pathways. And the brain lays pathways through deliberate, repeated practice. Moreover, the brain is a muscle. So if you took me to the gym right now and asked me to do bicep curls on 50 kilograms on each hand, I wouldn't be able to do it. I have to work up to that. I have to strengthen my muscles to be able to do the heavy lifting. Learning is exactly the same. And when we put AI and technology in front of kids and just give them answers and they think they're learning, we are actually doing them a tremendous disservice. We need to get back to paper and pencil. We need to get back to the productive struggle. We need to stop believing that learning has to be engaging. It has to have bells and whistles and badges. No, it's supposed to be hard. And when we allow our students to struggle, we are setting them up for the rest of their lives because they're going to encounter struggle in all aspects of the rest of their lives, whether it be career, relationships. But we're avoiding all of that by dumping iPads in front of them and calling that learning.
Yeah, I agree. That zone of proximal development is vital, where they're at that struggle point, but it's not too difficult, but it's difficult enough. What about from a learning perspective? I completely understand where you're coming from. What about from an assessment perspective? Because sometimes it can be a useful metric where certain platforms are able to triage the class data at a snapshot, and it provide the misconceptions to the teacher. For example, is there a place for technology in the classroom when it comes to that? It's not necessarily the vehicle for learning, but it's a vehicle for understanding whether learning is taking place.
Right. So more teacher-facing. The student takes the assessment on a device, and the teacher has the data.
Yeah, I'm thinking like when you have like a snapshot poll, or you have a quick entry, and then the summary comes to the teacher, or you have an assessment on 30 questions.
Right.
So
I would say pros and cons.
Yeah.
So let me talk about the pros and the cons here. So the pro is teachers are getting a lot of data, and now we have this whole data-informed instruction school of thought, which we've had for years, which technology has enabled. However, have teachers been deeply trained about how to pick apart the millions of data points they get every year on their classes? Because that is a lot of data. So that's number one. Is data good? Yeah. But how is the data used? And is the teacher trained on how to use the data? Number two, based on a lot of research, children do better on paper and pencil tests than they do on computer tests as well. So that's an interesting fact. Is the data that's being collected by the assessment, is that data accurately reflecting the capability of the child? Computer adaptive tests, you would tend to think so, in that they adapt to the ability level of the student. However, what I think is happening with assessments is that teachers are losing the nuances of their students. So when I was a classroom teacher many years ago, everything was still paper and pencil, or I would have students make dioramas or do presentations, write songs, drama, all kinds of different assessments. And I would sit there and either watch them while taking notes, or if they handed in written work, I would sit there with my pen. I would never use red. I thought it was obnoxious, but I would sit with my purple or green pen and student by student mark papers. Can you imagine the amount of information I was getting by doing that work myself? I knew my students so well. The computer wasn't giving me information. I was there getting the information.
Can those two things coexist? I think for summatives and that kind of assessment, I actually completely agree. I think there's nothing quite like it. I think watching a student write is like watching them think. And it's a very different observation process. But in terms of their plenaries, the mini plenaries, the snapshots, the bits that maybe you couldn't get, because the nature of teaching is so personal, it's so involved, and you have 24, 25 kids in a class or more in other schools. And it's it would be difficult to expect a teacher to snapshot an understanding in 20, 30 seconds of the general, how would I put this? Understanding, should we say, of the class of a particular point. Is it useful for those moments, not for the deeper learning necessarily?
Yeah, I would say and one of the things is, where is best practice around those snapshot moments? So I would say that would be for math.
Yes.
Right? So do my students understand this formula?
Yeah.
Do my 9-year-olds know their multiplication facts, right? Because we want that to be rote. Yeah. We want kids to know these math facts and formulas quickly so they can expend their cognitive effort on something else, right?
Yeah.
So I would think
and the class can move on as well at that. If they know it, then they can move on. But if they don't, then the teacher can maybe come back to something like that.
Yeah, so snapshot data can be very helpful for, again, specific use cases, math, some of the sciences. How do we collect snapshot data around English language arts? How do we collect snapshot data around critical thinking? I think technology companies have kind of seduced us into believing that if you use this assessment, you'll understand your student's level of critical thinking. But I believe the teacher is still the expert on that.
I agree. And the level of seduction has increased with AI because my subject, history, as a great example, and I would be more typically teaching the higher years, so it is long form responses, curated over hours often. It's very difficult to really get into that as a snapshot. But one of the things that I saw from apps like Flint, it was really tempting because it from a class perspective of 25 submissions, say, it can give you a general understanding of the themes of understanding, the themes of misunderstanding. There's temptation there for upper school usage in the language arts, or, in history as an example, from a continuous prose response. But I think more broadly speaking, I think you're absolutely right in terms of it is typically more used for a snapshot bit. But I guess the thing that I struggle with as a senior leader is, and because it is also different as well, maths is very different to science even. Whilst they're very similar, they are very different as a group into the language arts, to language acquisition.
To the humanities.
To humanities
so let's look at the humanities. The humanities are very values driven. So when you're teaching history, the child you're teaching that history to, what is that child's values? And how is the child applying what they're learning about history to their life right now? Do they agree with some historical act that happened 100 years ago? Would they like to see something like that happen in their life today? Can AI really gauge how a student feels about history and how they may or may not apply it to their life right now? And then how they're making judgments about what happened historically. Was it ethical? Was it not ethical? That's all part of their moral development, and moral education is a huge criteria in the UAE. It's mandated by the government.
And the submission of those responses too, from a student perspective, you don't get the intonation, you don't get the pitch, you don't get the tone of the language. It's a written black and white response in 40 characters or whatever it is. So you don't get the depth or the richness of the response. I totally take your point on that. There was something I wanted to ask you about, a slightly different tack for a moment. In terms of representation with student voice, the way you have your quiet kids in the class and your more confident, shall we say, kids in the class, and they're more willing to submit their answers, they're more willing to put their hand up, put their their views forward. One of the ways I've seen it used nicely, and again, I'm very balanced with this, and as my leadership career has evolved, and I know you're aware of this, but I have become more, not anti-tech, but more balanced in terms of it has a place, but the place has to be limited based on the broader picture.
Right.
One of the ways I've seen it used nicely is where a student maybe isn't confident to put their hand up, and if you put a question out to the class, you maybe are able to gauge the answers of some less confident students. And we used to do that in written form with silent debate, say, for example, with a huge piece of huge piece of paper on the table, and you'd write as opposed to speak, and that way people could contribute, and then you'd be responding to all your answers, your questions, etc. It was great, actually.
So why did you stop doing that?
Well, we did. It's a good question.
I mean, there's a huge piece of paper there with every student's answer. Why is technology better?
No, well, that's a great question. It is a great question. It's a great question.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily, and I'm not making the case that it is.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm asking is from a practical perspective, as a quick snapshot, it's a lot more functional maybe for the teacher to get to that point quicker, to get the responses easier, and therefore spend a significantly less time on that process, and maybe as a result that process becomes more habitual because it's more accessible for the teacher.
Right.
Maybe I'm hypothesizing.
Well, look, I believe in efficiency for teachers. Why? Because teachers have already done all the work to develop their brains, right? Teachers are already expert learners. Children are not expert learners. Children have not gone through all of the arduous and painful processes to develop their brain. And when we put technology in front of them, and now especially with AI, they're bypassing all of those hard, long processes to develop the neural pathways in their brain that are going to help them be very successful in all aspects of their life in the future.
I agree.
Yeah.
What we are doing as a school, we're limiting screen time to 45 minutes a day. I know we've spoke about this before. It's not a panacea. It's not a great, we fixed the problem now. The reason we are doing that is to be more intentional with how technology is used, because effectively what it creates is a debate between teachers as to who gets to use that time in the day. And we won't necessarily use it every day, but we want to create that intentionality with use. Is that a philosophy that you would support? Where are the limitations with that? How could that be better? And I'm asking you genuinely because our conversations have been formative in the past for myself, and you're at the cutting edge of the research here. And I know that it's more than a superficial screen time limitation, but where can we go further with that? I'm interested to explore that.
Well, I would start by saying, you said 45 minutes of technology a day.
Yes.
So I would say, is it EdTech or is it TechEd, which are two very different things that I don't think schools are understanding the difference in right now. So are those screens related to building robots? Yeah. Are those screens related to learning coding? Are those screens related to some engineering concept? Because right now there's a force on schools to give kids technology. Technology is not an app on an iPad. I strongly support technical education. I wish my daughter knew how to build a robot. I wish my daughter knew the language of Python and coding. Even though AI is a better coder than a human, a person who understands how AI is coding is much better equipped to tell AI how to code than a person who doesn't understand the back end of coding. So I would say to you, is it EdTech or is it TechEd for those 45 minutes? And if it is EdTech, is it active screen time or is it passive screen time? And how is it being used to do what with what child? And the caveat to all of this is that there are some children who need assistive technologies to be successful in school. So this conversation puts that to the side. There are students with learning differences and special needs, whether they be physical or emotional or neurodivergent, who need technology. We call it assistive technology to help them succeed in school. So that would be a different scenario. So that's 100%. What I would ask you.
It's a big
Give
question.
me a use case of where that technology is being used for 45 minutes.
So really interesting question, and I agree with you on the IEP side of things. So the individual education, every policy is underpinned by what's best for the child developmentally, kind of where they're at. So fundamentally, come back to core principles at an individual level. If a child was struggling to access the curriculum, an immersive reader, for example, was going to help them break down language barriers, then we would look at that on an individual case basis.
Right.
Being mindful of the fact that we know there is a well-being detriment to over technology use. And we as a school, we define technology and innovation separately. And I think that's to your point around EdTech versus TechEd. So we have innovation as a curriculum in the school, but that is a curriculum. We have technology, which is effectively, to simplify it, screen time. Now, screen time, when we are using screen, we want to reduce that almost as much as humanly possible. We want to get it down to zero and only use it where it's going to redefine what is possible with the learning. And that is the challenge there. But our innovation curriculum will use screen time for, the purposes of the curriculum. You mentioned about AI and prompt engineering, for want of a better kind of phrase. Computational thinking is not something that you necessarily have to do with a screen. The best example I've seen that was a grade 3 teacher taking instructions from their class to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Right. And it was absolutely brilliant because the teacher did exactly what the kids told the teachers to do. And it was a disaster. So the kids learned and understood that actually the input in direct correlation with the output, there's a strong correlation there. So it doesn't have to necessarily be screen time. But then when you get to the more technical aspects, so we've got robotics in the curriculum from grade 3, for example, we're integrating AI into the robotics. So again, it's not necessarily screen time, it's using hardware. So where, for example, we will be formatting a humanoid robot to converse with people in the reception, as an example. That's part of the curriculum in the upper primary school. Again, there's some screen time elements within that, but it's not about the screen time. It's about the learning behind that and the engineering and computational thinking and robotics and all those things. And again, things like one of the curriculum bits we have in our innovation curriculum, which is 3 times a week. So separate to your maths and science, we have innovation 3 times a week within the school curriculum. We have drones, so we have 15 or 20 miniature drones, and the students are programming to use those drones in a display format the way you would see on the Palm. So doing countdowns from 10, 9, the way they whiz around and create the letters or numbers. So really cool stuff. Okay. But again, we couldn't do that without the screen time, so to speak, there. So again, it's a vehicle to the curriculum as opposed to the other way around. Now, in my subject, say history as an example, or maths, or some of your other platforms, well, maybe you are going to use it in a very, very niche way. We as a school are moving away from screen time in classroom. And the reason we're limiting it at 45 minutes is because we are creating the conversations between academic staff around intentionality. And effectively, we're asking staff to justify. Now, there are 1,000 different examples where technology use in a classroom could be really beneficial, but there are way more examples when it's not. Right. And basically, it's difficult for me to kind of catch-all define exactly what it would look like if it's used well. But we just want to have those conversations, because at the moment those conversations aren't taking place in staff rooms. And I think actually staff are really supportive of this. When we've raised this idea with our new staff, when we're meeting regularly now, they're really supportive. Our head of science was delighted when we spoke at interview. He couldn't believe it that school was actually going to take the step to say, do you know what? We actually don't want technology, again, separate from innovation. We don't want technology in the classroom. It isn't helpful for learning.
No, it's distracting.
It fundamentally, yeah. But again, we're going to have those conversations at an individual level and see where a head of maths might say, I want to use it for this one thing. The question to that would be, well, could we do it without technology, firstly? Because if you can, then you shouldn't be using it. Right. Kids need to write. Kids need to write with a pen and paper, not just because, in the future they're going to be using laptops and tablets, etc. We know that, we understand that. But there is a process and there is a learning that takes place that is different if you're using a pen and paper. And like you said before, for unformed brains, for our youngest, for all our learners actually, all right up the way to DP2, there is a process that they're going through when they're using a pen and paper that is formative in the process of learning. So it comes back to the question of how. So again, we limit screen time for that reason, because it creates the conversation. And I think what I genuinely think will happen in our school at Ambassador International Academy Mankhool, actually over time, that 45 minutes a day will reduce. And we're capping it at 45 minutes a day to create those conversations. But as those conversations take place between staff, I think will become quite hard to justify the use of technology when we get staff thinking about whether we could use something else. But again, this is almost like a hard reset from the post-COVID era where technology has become a default for staff, not necessarily because they see it as a prerequisite for learning either. Often it's been senior leadership teams or heads of school who are looking for effective technology use in schools. And it's created bad habits for staff that they don't actually want and never wanted in the first place. Head of science being a good example of that. So I think there is a reset coming from a staff perspective, and our approach is about EdTech. It's about where we can really transform education through the use of technology. But again, the only way we can know that is if we have the conversations, and by limiting the screen time, we force those conversations to take place. And again, how that evolves over the future, we'll see. Right. But I do think it will fundamentally lend itself to a reduction in screen time overall over time.
Right. So, I think it will, absolutely. I teach a master's of education. We have a master's of education program at Middlesex University, and all of the students in that program are practicing teachers in the UAE. They come from Ras Al Khaimah, Sharjah, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Ajman. And what is the number one thing they all say about EdTech? That they are constantly policemen. Their kids, even the little ones, are so distracted. They find them on YouTube. They find them chatting. They find them looking at inappropriate websites, because a lot of these kids have VPNs on their devices, which get around the school firewalls. So the number one I have been seeing in my practice as not just a teacher trainer in schools, but as an actual lecturer, teachers are exhausted. They want to teach. They want to connect with students. They don't want to be the police. The distraction. Even if you're using the best education technology and you are a highly qualified teacher who has been trained on the frameworks to make education technology more meaningful, not necessarily meaningful, you still have to fight distraction.
Agreed.
And that is very, very difficult.
I think textbooks have a real role in schools.
Yes.
And I think digital textbooks have kind of been quite fancy and attractive for school leaders from a cost perspective, but also from an optics perspective.
And from an efficiency perspective.
For sure, even in terms of procurement timelines and things like that. But ultimately, again, coming back to core values, it's more time on screens. And it's a competition for attention when you're looking at your text. Think about your own A-level revision or like post-16 revision for your big exams going to university. I can picture my bedroom. I can see my setup. My books are in front of me.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine if behind that directly was my social group. And that would have been impossible.
Yeah.
And it's really unfair to expect kids to have that same competition.
They don't have the self-regulation skills, the part of the brain that's in control of paying attention and regulating yourself, sitting there and doing something that's boring and that you don't want to do. That doesn't finish developing until people are 25 years old.
I'm not sure I finished.
Even I, when I sit down and I'm trying to do very deep work, whether I'm researching something to create a presentation for my own students or I'm grading Masters of Education dissertations, I have to put my phone in another room 100%. And I have to turn off all notifications everywhere because even I have a hard time not getting distracted. So why are we expecting children to not be distracted?
Exactly. And I think that's the whole point of where education is going to go. I think 20 years from now, we'll be looking back at this as a very formative period for our views on technology in classrooms. And I actually think more schools will be doing what we are doing. And obviously they'll be learning in what we're doing too. We don't expect it to be perfect, but we expect that they'll be learning there. And actually the evolution of practice in schools will be more akin to less technology than more of it. Because for all the reasons we spoke about. Right. There was one question I wanted to ask you as you were chatting there. Textbooks.
Yes.
It was about textbooks. I think it's a funny one because 5 years ago or maybe less, the idea of bringing physical hard copy textbooks in would have been quite frowned upon in schools. But then when you speak to parents and when you speak to teachers, actually they really want it. And that's why we brought them back, because you need them for all year groups, because you need a core reference text so that kids know where to go if they are struggling to access information. You know what that content is going to be. You know what's going to be assessed and what's important in the curriculum, and it is there as a reference point for them. Right. I think as well, having that in all year groups and all subjects is really, really important.
Right, but there's a caveat there as well. And this is some place where teacher-facing technology can be really helpful. Some textbooks are not, they're just not appropriate for certain students. English language learners cannot access a textbook for learning. Students who may have dyslexia have a really hard time with textbooks. Students who are way below grade level in their reading skills are going to have a hard time accessing a textbook. A textbook does not differentiate reading levels. However, there are programs on the internet where you can upload a chapter in a textbook, and that program will rewrite the textbook, keeping the content exactly the same for the different ability level readers you have in your classroom. So now the student who's below grade level in reading comprehension and in decoding, that same content in that textbook can be adapted to be easier for that student. The student who's way above grade level, who's reading at a university level, you can also adapt the chapter in that textbook to meet their needs. So now a teacher does have an easier time practicing differentiated instruction. So I don't believe textbooks are the answer because they're very one-size-fits-all. I believe it's how you use the textbook. So let's say the teacher doesn't have access to software that can adapt the textbook to different ability levels. Is that teacher then creating small groups in the classroom? So the higher ability level readers, they're reading their textbook maybe in a circle and talking to each other as they read it about, what's coming up and what they're thinking and what they're understanding. But the low ability level kids who are still learning how to read and comprehend, is the teacher sitting with them in a small group, taking them through each paragraph of the textbook, kind of hand-holding them, scaffolding them so that they're actually comprehending what they're reading.
Yeah, kind of that core, that key adaptive practice is vital, regardless of whatever you use, really, textbooks or not.
But digital textbook have what I call off-ramps. You click on something, and you're no longer looking at the textbook. You're looking maybe at a vocabulary page, or you're off to a website. And what we see happening there is it takes, when the brain is focusing on something, when it then loses focus and shifts to something else, it can take anywhere from 7 to 12 minutes to get back on topic.
And if you consider an introduction and a conclusion to a lesson, the middle part of your lesson is probably 30 minutes. So if you've got a couple of those distractions in there, that's high risk from a pedagogical perspective.
Well, a lot of research shows that for every hour a kid is on a device, 38 minutes of it, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing on the device because they're just too distracted.
This is something that I'm acutely aware of. One of the things we are doing, I'm interested in your perspective on this, we are bringing in hardware that is, so their laptops, that we have a specific device that we'll be using, which basically is locked. So you cannot do other things on it at certain points. So for example, if we were in a class now, if I was a student, you were the teacher, you could lock a specific website domain name, and they cannot get off that on their device. And one of the things, again, which is a little bit different that we're doing, we're not allowing people to bring their own devices from home into school. If they want to have a device at home, that's okay.
Thank heavens.
But yeah, well, I'm interested to hear because I want to flesh it out fully, and I want you to poke holes in it as well, because this is good for us to inform our practice too. So in essence, they bring in their device, they use it in school, and when the class is active in that 45 minutes, if they're using their devices, the teacher can lock Microsoft Word and one website, say, for example, or a textbook page or whatever it is. But they can also lock it until the next day. So when they go home, they can't get on anything else. They can't do anything else. And one of the reasons we do that is because we understand that kids should have access to whatever they want to have access within reason. They should be able to use a device if they've got a device at home and that's what it's been bought for, with a Christmas present, whatever it is. Right. If that's a family decision, that's for the family. That's not for us to make that decision, whether we agree with it or not. But when they're using a school device, it actually has to be separate. I don't know about yourself, but the example I always use to parents when I'm justifying this approach, because obviously there's a cost implication, is, do you have a work phone? I have a work phone. And I got a work phone about 5-6 years ago. Before, work phones were generally the done thing. It's the best thing I ever did. The reason being is that it's complete dissociation. When I'm having dinner with my kids and my wife, and if my phone bleeps, it might be my mum. Well, I want to read that message. I want to just see if everything's okay or whatever. Well, I know, but I'm thinking about my mum.
At the dinner table, no devices. No devices at the dinner table. Not the work and not the personal.
I do agree with you there. I do agree with that.
That's human time, connection time.
You are very right. You are very right. But say you're I don't know, you're using your device. We all overuse our devices more than we should do, even if we use them minimally.
Guilty as well. Absolutely.
It is the nature of how they're designed to be fair, which is a whole other conversation. But if it's work related, it's like, oof, I'm back in work mode. I'm thinking about something, and maybe it's stressful, maybe it's not, but maybe it's just very consuming cognitively. And actually, maybe I'm not present then for the next 5 or 7 minutes or 12 minutes with my kids, which I want to be. So I have that separate device, which allows me to fully concentrate on what I want to be concentrating on in that moment.
Right.
Well, it's exactly the same for kids, but they aren't capable of being responsible enough or having the financial autonomy to make the decision to have that separate device. But we can do that for them. We can make the decision on what we think is best for them. Now, it's a hard one for us because we've then got to justify the financial impact for the parent. It's potentially a second device that they need to have. So we've got to make sure that it's an affordable device and not a fancy
But
device.
It's not a second device that they need to have, because why does their 7-year-old have a device in the first place?
Well,
why are we allowing our children to have unlimited access to all the information in the world in their pockets? Kids are getting cell phones, smartphones at 6 and 7 years old in this country with no restrictions.
And that's something we've got to challenge in schools. And we can't necessarily, we can help educate parents in terms of what we believe the science is showing and the research is showing. But ultimately, in school, we have to set an example for device use as well.
Absolutely.
Hence why we're heading in the direction we are heading in.
I just want to interject, though.
Go ahead.
I will take a school-issued and school-managed device every day of the week and twice on Sunday over a device that goes school, home, school, home, school, home. That is not managed by the school, because kids are smart. They know how to get around firewalls in the school. And if my child doesn't know how to get around a firewall in a school, her friends do, and her friends show her and tell her, right? School-managed devices are superior in terms of keeping our kids safe.
Agreed.
Filtering out harmful and disgusting content, pardon my frankness, right? And also locking down the device and limiting the websites kids are allowed to go on.
I know, agreed.
So that's really important. And from a pedagogical perspective, when a teacher tells a student to go search something on the internet, that student then has to sort through millions of options on where to find information. Yep. There is no brain in the world that is capable of sorting through millions of options of pieces of information alongside an 11 or 12-year-old brain. Teachers need to be saying, look at website A, look at website B, look at website C, and compare and contrast the information on these 3 limited choices websites that have been vetted by me, not everything that Google gives to you.
Agreed. I know, I agree completely. I was holding off from interrupting you because I wanted to make a point. I'm just going to think for a second. The vetting of those things is key. Mm-hmm. I've lost my trail of thought.
And these might be trusting partners. Encyclopedia Britannica online. That could be a trusting partner. That might be a way. Let's say you want a 7th grade student to compare and contrast 3 texts. Okay, we know reading on screens is not as good for the brain, and the information doesn't go in as deeply as reading paper. But being able to easily access multiple vetted texts to do a very focused compare and contrast project. Of course, I'd rather be printed. They go to the student gets to mark them, highlight them, write in the corner, put Post-it notes.
My trail of thought is back on that point. Yeah. So one of the nice things that we're doing is the device. You mentioned about the relationship between home and school. and taking that school managed device, which is far safer, I would say, not perfectly safe because it's impossible on a device, but far safer.
Yeah.
One of the things we're able to do is actually lock it when it goes home. So when they get on their own network or they get on their own Wi-Fi, it doesn't actually matter because the hardware itself is locked. And I think that's a nice evolution of how devices, hardware, is being used in school, and the software then supports that when they're in school and when they're, the MDMs and the firewalls and all those things.
But if you're only using technology, any technology, 45 minutes a day, why do they need devices?
For when they need it, I would say. So again, that conversation around pedagogy and when it's transformational in learning, whether it's representation, whether it's snapshot answers it from a plenary perspective or something else. And again, as I mentioned before, from grade 5 to grade 12 across the different subject areas, 10 or 12 subject areas or more as they get older, there's lots of different examples I can think of where teachers will make the case for a small use of screen time that will benefit or transform the learning that could take place. Now, that's when, if we are going to do that, if we're going to have access to technology at all, then it needs to be safeguarded.
So at what age will these kids be receiving their school-issued device?
So that would be from grade 3 to grade 5. They have like a small access to technology. So it's probably not 45 minutes a day, but it's the same policy effectively from grade 3 all the way through to the end of grade 9, and then grade 10 with submissions of portfolio works. We would need to be more sensible with that in terms of because with the IB there's submissions etc. that are online that we have to mandate for. But yeah, so from grade 3 upwards.
Okay. Yeah, so I'd push back on you. Really? Grade 3?
Go for it.
Grade 3, they need a school-issued device.
So we have, for example, our innovation curriculum, which is 3 lessons a week, even in grade 3. So, that's almost every day in school that is innovation. It's computer science, it's robotics, it's AI, it's all of those things that we are accessing from grade 3 to grade 5. So
that's for the tech ed.
Oh, it's all tech ed. I'm just to make sure we're on the same lines here. It's innovation.
Okay.
Now, we do also have certain mandated things in the UE. We have PTEs, we have PTMs, PTS, we have past data, we have all these mandated tests that have to be done online on screens, which is what it is, isn't it? There's no point in debating it too much because it's mandated.
A mandate and you don't have a choice.
Exactly. And so we have to do those things. So within our policies, we are mindful of that and we're mindful, okay, we're going to need to have that. But certainly early years, but grade 1, grade 2, there should be realistically next to no screen time. There will be moments, but again, it's a trolley. It's wheeled in and it's wheeled out, and it's very, very heavily controlled. As they get older, access to say even things like computer literacy, so Microsoft Word, those things, they do need to start to learn those skills as they get up into the school, as they head into the secondary school. So there are important moments where that becomes, but again, it's tech ed. As opposed to EdTech, if I'm understanding your definitions correctly.
Yeah.
But again, some teachers will make the argument that there are moments where certain curriculum areas will benefit from some EdTech, and I would support that individually on an individual case basis, depending on what the argument is from the teacher.
Right.
It might not be a very strong argument. It might be one that we push back on and say, actually, you know what, we don't feel actually that's right. But that happens at a curriculum level and a planning level. So again, how can we justify the cost or the procurement or the buying of a device from a parent perspective? Because if we're going to do any at all, which we're going to severely limit, but we are still going to have access to devices at certain times in the curriculum. When we do, it needs to be fully safeguarded at hardware and a software level so that the hardware is safe. We know that it's protected as much as possible. And if they were to try and bypass that, there are ways and means for us to monitor it and catch it effectively. So that's our intention.
And I would say there are 2 other layers to that, if you will, and I know we're running out of time. First, specific teacher training, right? Okay, now your hardware is good, your software is good, the kids are safe, everything is limited. Has the teacher had very specific training on some of the meaningful learning with technology frameworks? Meaning, if you're going to use technology, Are you following these principles and practices to make sure that it is used in a more meaningful way, not in a passive way? So community of inquiry framework, and I'm not talking the SAMR model, everyone, and it's a good model, but it's not a how-to model, it's a taxonomy. So the how-to models, the community of inquiry framework, Jonathan, meaningful learning with technology framework, TPAC, are those being integrated? But TPAC is also kind of a taxonomy, not a how-to, unless you dig into the research.
But it's similar with the SAMR model. It's a philosophy too. It's an underpinning culture as to how you use it. The way in which we are readying staff to make sure that this lands from day one is our training has already started, and the school isn't open yet. So we are meeting with teachers online. We met with them just over a week ago, and we kind of started this journey, the unpacking of what this looks like. And over a course of this term, through our many meetings with staff, we'll help them understand what we are looking for. Because again, people are going to bring different identities around the use of technology, different philosophies. We want them to understand who we are, what we're about, and understand how to apply it in a classroom setting, but also to gauge their ideas too, because they'll have great ideas about, how we can apply this philosophy and how we can do these things, because we don't necessarily have all the answers. We also have an extended inset period for our staff of 2 weeks, because again, we need that time to really go deep on teaching and learning, to really go deep on practice. Now, whether it's TPAC or whether it's something else, ultimately, the outcome will be the same. It will be really refined use of technology, only where it's transformational in terms of the learning for students, because we're aware of the negative impact too. And again, it will evolve over time to its best case scenario or impact over time. And what that will look like, I don't know. Honestly, just being transparent, I think none of us could really know where it's going to go, because maybe technology will evolve to something else. I don't think we could have anticipated the rise of AI and what that is and how that could be helpful. I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying.
Don't get me started.
I'm not saying.
And I speak from the research when I say, don't get me started about AI in a child's life.
I agree. To be clear, I agree with you on that one. But I'm saying hypothetically, these are unknown unknowns.
Teacher facing. Any AI use right now should be teacher facing. I will leave it there.
Well, it's
the other layer I want to say, given that, is if the teachers are highly trained on how to use technology in a meaningful way in those limited use cases that you're talking about, less than 45 minutes a day, what is the scope and sequence? What is the scope and sequence of what technical or digital skill a child needs to know by the end of a certain grade year? I don't see schools having this. So there's all of this ed tech in schools, but how is that aligned to curriculum or a scope and sequence of skills that a child needs at a certain age? It all just seems to be kind of haphazard.
100% agree. It's a little bit like when teachers task kids with cutting something out to put it into a taxonomy of skills. What is difficult? Is it the learning or is it the task? And the example you used before of filtering the internet for a piece of information, what's difficult there? Is it the learning of the curriculum aspect that you're looking at, or is it the triaging of information in this huge skill set that is required to navigate Google, etc.? Come back to the AI point as well. It is fundamentally illegal as well in schools to be using AI at the age of under the age
13
of 13.
And below.
And the reason for that for parents is it's data related, because they are submitting their information, they're submitting their data. So no school should be using AI from a large language model perspective, submitting information, whether it's a simple response into any ChatGPT or Claude or whatever.
And to clarify that for your listeners, AI servers are not embedded inside of schools and protected. Yeah. When your child uses AI, that information is going to the AI company's server. And then that is adding to the profile of your child in the hands of strangers.
So the data is insecure.
The data is not secure.
It's not held within the school environment. Yeah. I think that's something, again, that schools are adapting to because this has happened very, very quickly.
Yeah.
But, the best schools are well aware of this for a long time now and have that, mindset that AI is for teacher use.
Yeah.
And there's a whole different thing on teacher use of AI. There can be great efficiencies there from a workload perspective, which is something that needs a lot of focus. It needs our constant focus as leaders to reduce workload for staff. But it's a whole other conversation.
Well, technology was supposed to reduce workload for staff, and it didn't. So the jury is still out on whether AI will do it. AI could create more deliverables for staff the way technology did. So we'll see.
Possibly so.
We don't know yet. Yeah.
Alison, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
And I really look forward to watching your school evolve. Because what we need in this part of the world and really globally is we need to see model schools who are having student success without constant use of technology. So we need these case studies now where they're doing this in Sweden. Technology has been removed from every classroom in Sweden, right? So we need these case studies to say, hey, look at this school. This school uses technology less than 45 minutes a day, but the students are happy. They're not anxious. They're not depressed. And they know how to think critically. They're cognitively advanced. They're doing great on their exams.
And right? I think, and I agree with you. I also think parents already know. I think parents know what their kids need. They know that a significant reduction of screen time, potentially over the course of the next few years, an elimination of screen time in schools is a positive thing for their child, son or daughter. And so it will be a very interesting period ahead of us for sure in terms of our careers and where this goes. But I'm grateful for your time today, and I'm grateful for your insights as well, genuinely, because they have been formative in terms of the evolution of the philosophy of this school and our approach to technology, because it is evolving. And there is so much information, pro and con, and it's difficult for parents to come to a reasoned conclusion as to what is best for their child. But we believe that technology use in schools has to be balanced with such careful caveats, such careful consideration as to when it is used, because ultimately, as I say, I think parents know that this is what's best. When you talk about happiness, you talk about well-being, you talk about mood and all those things that are so
it's all
linked.
Connected. Learning doesn't happen over here and happiness doesn't happen over here. It's all happening right here. Inside one individual. Unhappy children don't learn. Anxious children don't learn.
Agreed. Thank you for your time, Dr. Alison. I appreciate it very much.
Thank